All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Ventures Podcast. Today we've got a great list of topics for you. We're going to be diving into a deep dive on space and space technology. We will be talking about the latest startup requests from Y Combinator as well as A16Z. So what they're expecting to be popular areas to build startups in 2025. We're going to talk about Spotify's early days and what allowed them to be the winner in the music streaming industry. We're going to talk about The Launchpad, a wonderful book that details Y Combinator in detail, the most successful Silicon Valley startup accelerator. We're going to talk about what we're building at SlashDev and how you can build a backend for a task management system like Asana. And then we're going to dive into some of the latest AI news, from OpenAI's release of 03 to open source models like DeepSeek becoming state of the art. So let's dive into it and see what we got going this week. All right, so to kick things off, let's talk about space tech. So the first topic we want to cover is this idea of a new space station. So we'll talk in a bit more broadly about the space industry, some of the top players, but we thought it was really interesting. Emmanuel actually found that the ISS is going to be retired in 2030, if I'm not mistaken. Correct?
Right, yes, at least they're planning so. And then we have all these other private companies that are trying to at least compete to be the new space station. And I think now towards some of the later slides that we have up, Haven or Vast is one of these private companies. I think it was also recently started. It's a freshly startup, and they have the Haven 2 with their modules, their modular design, basically. And I think it's really cool how they have come up with a pretty interesting concept and also a timeline of how to launch this.
Awesome.
Maybe we can pull this up as well right now.
Definitely. So here we have, so Vast Space is the company. This is Haven 2. So obviously founded in 2021, still proving themselves, but a very interesting project. So this isn't something that's guaranteed to happen, but something for anyone who's interested in space that gets you pumped up and excited to see, kind of pushing the frontiers of technology and really finding a way to replace the ISS. Because if I'm not mistaken, the ISS is the most expensive human-made structure ever built. So estimated cost of over $150 billion with ongoing operational costs and billions and billions each year in maintenance and upgrades and fixes. So obviously this isn't a commercial business project. This is a international collaboration on space research and science, really. And so if we take a look here at what Vast Space is trying to do, I think this is really fun to see. So, we've got a similar kind of look to the ISS here. So you've got your pods here and all your solar panels, sleeping areas, training areas, so that you can stay fit, even though you're not having gravity to support your body. Tons of research equipment, I'm sure. And this is pretty cool to see. So here, any minute now, we have the timeline of how they expect to do this. So starting in 2028, Haven 2 modules will launch approximately every 6 months, with a final station configuration slated for 2032. So this is going to be module by module. So you see first this Haven module, then they will get the second module, third, and just like Lego blocks, they will start building this thing and add a core in which they can connect and reconfigure and extend the core. So really cool stuff. This is like a Lego. Lego space kit for anyone. So, I really hope they succeed. I definitely have questions about the viability of projects like this, specifically because the ISS was the most expensive human project of all time, arguably. There's other highly expensive projects, but it's right up there. Um, if I'm not mistaken, it was started by the Russians, I believe, and then basically after the fall of the Soviet Union, kind of picked up by the US and the Europeans to help support it and build it out to what it is today. So it was never a profitable uh, venture. There was no business model behind it. And so, depending on where we're at in the world, if we're dealing with a world with lots of conflicts, it might not be the first thing that people want to spend their money on. But it's definitely something that we need to move towards if we want to be a spacefaring civilization and really be able to take that next step. So, really cool stuff here to see and to see the progress there. Yeah, and I can highly recommend this. The other week to prepare for this, I watched a 5-hour YouTube series on space technology. It's free documentary engineering is the channel. Really great stuff, and they go through everything from space telescopes to communication, Mars, Saturn, the ISS. So here they go in detail about the whole history of the International Space Station and where it's at today. They talk about other planets that we've looked at, all the different missions that we've made to different planets and the probes that we've sent. So it's incredible the history of all the things we've done in space. You forget just how many probes and how much information we've gathered from space, as well as things like the actual spacesuits as well might be in the ISS section where they show like the very early astronaut suits and then where they're at today. So super cool stuff here as well. I can highly recommend that. All right, great. So then, of course, we have to talk about SpaceX, the company that continues to redefine the space industry, flipped launching on its head, making rockets reusable and cutting the cost to launch exponentially. So when we look at SpaceX and we just look at the overall space tech market, one of the first things I wanted to know is what's the market size of these different opportunities. So when we look at the space industry, the biggest market is satellite services. There we're looking at about 125 to 150 billion of services in space right now. The second biggest market would be ground equipment. So this coordinates everything that goes on in space. So this is all the really high power radars, observation equipments, terminals, gateways, launch pads, etc. That's around 130 to 140 billion. Satellite manufacturing, you take a big step down. That's a 12 to 15 billion dollar market. And then launch services is a 6 to 8 billion dollar market, so a bit smaller even. And so, when I first thought of SpaceX and launch services, I didn't realize how much smaller the launch market was than the satellite services market. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the first satellites, commercial satellites, I believe it was AT&T, launched one of the first commercial satellites where you could broadcast television through that satellite. And that's really just the business model that makes the most sense. I mean, what is SpaceX doing now? They're focused on Starlink and making it so low Earth orbit satellites can help you get internet access anywhere around the world. So, really cool stuff. Got a few things to show here just to kind of put things in perspective. So, first of all, one thing I think that's really important to see to put you in the frame of where we're at in history is if you just look at the world that we were in 1958, we were talking, but we were just starting to launch things into space. 49 launches, 14 here. And then when we zip forward in time to today, what I really think of when I see this is we're on the exponential curve of space now. And now we are at the full machine gun stage of space where we are launching more launches per year than ever. And so SpaceX is doing some crazy frequency of launches these days, bringing things into space and also dropping the cost of launching into space. So during the early space shuttle days, we're talking like 50 plus thousand per kilogram to get that material into space. Now we're talking $200 when we're looking at the Starship. And even, $1,600 for the Falcon Heavy was still a huge jump. So what does this do economically when we have space flight being so much more affordable? And now a small company could afford to launch a modular satellite, which expands the whole industry of who can play here, who can launch satellites, and what can be done. So really cool stuff going on. Elon actually recently tweeted you can now watch live sports in 8K in Antarctica with Starlink. So you're going to see more global internet access. I mean, it's going to be hard to compete with Starlink when you have to lay fiber as an alternative. So really cool stuff to see. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on that, Emmanuel?
I mean, not many, but I was kind of interested in seeing how Starlink does in Germany, and because obviously Germany prohibits a lot of things, and when it comes to innovation, they're not well. When it comes to adopting new innovation, I don't think they're on the top of the list. But I just realized also that they quite recently also adopted Starlink Mini, I think it was called, in Germany. So I was actually kind of surprised to see that this thing is actually it's actually becoming big all around Europe as well. So that's kind of nice to see.
Yeah,
I
that's
think it goes
awesome.
from I think I remember seeing it from 50 US dollars for or $40 for 50 gigabytes or something like that. I can't recall the specifics anymore, but I think seeing this also blue in Germany is something that I was never expecting. But
Yeah, I mean, it was only a few years ago that I remember my friend's dad had Starlink out at a kind of rural cabin, and that was really cool. And it functioned way better than the actual internet out there. And then, just that was maybe, 2018 or so, I want to say. I could be wrong. But then just a few years later, and we have Starlink being used way more frequently all around the world. You have it being used in crisis situations like Ukraine. You have it to where you can actually get streaming while flying around the world. So really cool stuff. And this is just the start for SpaceX. SpaceX, I've seen many VCs on Twitter talking about how this is the most popular private company that everyone wants to invest in and get a piece of. So obviously Starlink satellites, I want to say they have 700 plus satellites right now in their cluster. Let me double check that and see where we're at right now. Oh, way
maybe
off, way off. So they're at 6,900 satellites in orbit in the Starlink cluster right now. Just crazy. And they
yeah,
have all of these orbiting in a mesh so that they cross each other and transmit data to each other, and basically can keep you covered and keep you having high bandwidth internet wherever you are. So really incredible.
okay, yeah. I mean, uh, I'm just really quickly going back to the topic about Germany because something that I find really interesting. I mean, I don't want to play devil's advocate, but I mean, I'm from Germany, so when I think about it, sometimes Germany, when it comes to internet, especially, I think they are one of the countries that haven't even adopted yet fiber optics. like completely. I mean, I think the coverage is at 35% or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but I think there's huge demand then for this. The Starlink in Germany, especially because, as far as I remember it, like we're still using copper cables to get our internet.
Hmm.
We're still using the
Hmm.
traditional way to do it, and the main reason why we're not switching it is because of the costs that come up. But I think Starlink would be a cost-effective way to actually transition to maybe something that's more reliable and fast.
Yeah, definitely. It at least gives you the choice, even if your city doesn't want to lay fiber, to be able to get really high speed internet, which is critical if you want to be able to use a lot of the latest technologies or have real time interaction with some of these LLMs as well. It's really interesting. So it looks like Germany, about 43% of households have access to fiber, but only 22% have activated those connections. Interesting.
I think I
And I can
remember.
see Germany has a lower internet adoption than the US. Germany has internet penetration of about 93%, while the US has 97% internet adoption by its
I,
population.
I
Really
think I
interesting.
remember seeing somewhere like a news from the Deutsche Telekom, which is the major internet provider in Germany, and I think, but this was a while ago. I don't remember 2020 or 2021, maybe even 2019. I'm not sure. And I remember reading on it, and they said that the main reason why they haven't switched yet to fiber optics is because it's just that much more expensive, and that the copper cable's working perfectly fine, and that they would just engineer the best copper cables out there to cover for internet. And in my eyes, I was just thinking, okay, so we're just doing this whole, electric vehicle scheme again. Germany was so late to adopting electric vehicles until it was too late, and I see it kind of happening with internet as well. So I think Starlink, maybe in the future, I don't want to jinx anything, but maybe we could see this uh, grow really big in Germany.
Interesting. When I hear that, I think of somebody who already makes all the money laying that copper wire, not wanting to give up their contracts. That's what I think of. Because
Yeah,
it's
it
like,
could be.
why would you not lay the fiber optic? But yeah, interesting. Interesting. I also listened to a really good podcast. One of the best podcasts out there, I think, is Acquired. And they have the ACQ2, which is a sub podcast where they interview founders. And uh, so it's actually called Starfish Space. It's a Seattle based space company. These guys previously worked at Blue Origin and are now building out a satellite company to and maintain or decommission other satellites, because the satellite space is getting so crowded, right? I mean, we're filling up the Earth's orbit. There's several different orbit layers that we use, and we're just launching more and more stuff into space. So yeah, it's really interesting. I can quickly show what they're doing. And it was exciting to see just how much space technology is happening around Seattle for me being from that area. But this is Starfish Space, and their satellite is called Otter, and it goes out and does maintenance and repair, and as well as safe ejection, where they make sure that they launch it out so that it is not just floating junk in orbit, but gets safely decommissioned. And yeah, I mean, here you can see like a visualization of the actual satellites that we have around the Earth today, which is crazy. And yeah, this is kind of their satellite and what they do. So really cool stuff. And this would not be possible if it wasn't so affordable to launch things to space. Probably a good transition to another major player, Blue Origin, also looking to compete in the launch market and the space tourism market. So I know Blue Origin did send a crew of people, like a private group of citizens to space to do a flight. I believe Jeff Bezos was on that with them, actually, as well as a few other high wealth individuals who decided they wanted to do this. But just great to see other players really pushing things and innovating in this space. As I showed earlier with the launches, we're going parabolic right now. So like the more companies there are that are doing this, the better, because as it gets cheaper to bring things into space, it makes it easier for entrepreneurs to then start a satellite company, or maybe I want to run different experiments in space. So I need a satellite that can actually do that and can be exposed to these situations. And satellite engineering is so interesting because space is such a different environment than being on Earth. It's so much more unforgiving. Everything has to be able to be fixed on its own. You're never going to have a person who can go and fix your satellite. You're going to have, higher radiation levels. You're going to just have a much more harsh environment on which your electronics need to function, your solar panels need to function, and your optics need to function. So, really a fascinating uh, industry overall. Which have you heard of the New Zealand company that's also in the space industry?
No, I don't think so.
Let me pull this up really quick. Rocket Lab, easy to remember.
Oh, okay.
There's this thing on Twitter or X where people just say, just do things, right? And this guy's like an entrepreneur in New Zealand, in the not a country that's really leading in space, but just started building rockets and just made it happen, which is awesome to see. If you're just passionate about it and just keep pushing, you can do it. So they're actually, doing launches from New Zealand and innovating and, building out their own launch solution and then taking satellites up. So super cool to see what they're doing as well. And the founders done, there's YouTube videos about what they've done and everything, and really cool to see. So I just wanted to give them a quick shout out. Rocket Lab doing awesome stuff. Yeah. All right, great. So now another kind of space aspirational topic is going to the moon again, right? So the idea is, can we actually stay on the moon, work on the moon long term? So this is something more and more people are thinking about. Elon's talking about going multiplanetary, getting to Mars. Obviously, one of the first things we think about is going to the moon. I mean, it's right there. We can see it. We've been there. So why don't we go there and build a moon base? Obviously, I think the biggest problem with this is similar to the ISS, where what's the business model? And we're talking about massive costs and what's the potential return, right? But both China and the US are looking at going back to the moon. We've got NASA with its Artemis missions, which already has, I believe, the first mission, the unmanned mission, has already gone out, but they have several other missions planned to really start moving towards the moon again, seeing if we can establish a moon base. Super interesting stuff. Emmanuel, I know you were looking at this. What kind of stood out to you?
Yeah. So like, I think I'm also kind of having a hard time thinking about the feasibility of this. But I think the possibility are endless. I mean, if we do manage to kind of create a station at the moon, I mean, like you said before, everything that's in space kind of has to be done autonomous. We have to repair things. So I think it might be a little bit more easier if we have that space station on the moon. I mean, these are all speculations from my side and a little bit of videos like the ones from Bloomberg News. But I think it could accelerate things like space manufacturing that we're not going to go into detail to. But for example, chemical manufacturing. I think having a station at the moon can definitely be a huge support for this. When things are too dangerous to manufacture on Earth. Uh, and maybe we can use the moon as a fueling station. I'm no expert in space, but I think it would sound pretty cool having Elon Musk's rockets launch back and forth from the moon. Maybe there's less fuel requirement that they need to take off the moon because gravity is lower there. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah,
but that's
definitely.
what
I think it's an awesome dream to have a moon base, right? It's just like, what's the feasibility? But that's a good question to solve, right? Because if we can find a way to make a business model from being on the moon and actually get some materials that we need on Earth, or do some sort of manufacturing process, or really be able to sustainably live there and create a functioning economy on the moon, that's how we're going to have it make sense to go to Mars as well, right? So I think ultimately, this is a good step along that path. Um, yeah, so I mean, we'll never do as good of a job as a 5.5 hour documentary of running you through the whole space industry. There's lots of different deep dives on all these companies, um, from Starfish to Rocket Lab, SpaceX, Blue Origin, all of these. There's a ton of players out there, and a lot of good information to study. So I highly recommend you check out the space industry and just see what's going on. I think we're in the very early days of what's going to be going on in space, and potentially an era where entrepreneurs can really play in the space industry just with, a few $100,000 of investment or whatever it might be. You might be able to actually get a satellite into orbit, start playing around. So super cool stuff. Um, and then the Vast Haven, we already covered this, so kind of jumped through that a little bit earlier, but maybe we'll be able to renew the ISS and replace it when it is decommissioned in 2030.